Hello and welcome again, Aldsidu, Old Saxon heathens and Old Ways heathens of the Scandinavian and Germanic varieties. Today in this video I'm going to tackle the Wiccan Sabbat called Ostara, which Asatru keeps, versus the historical Oster and Oster. And I'm going to ask the same question as always, how historical is modern Asatru and what historical heathenry really was? Now, I've updated my map a bit here. The Germanic tribes, you can see they occupied Norway, Sweden, Denmark, and northern Germany. I believe that's a dark green color. I'm red-green colorblind, probably should have picked a different color. But nonetheless, that is the area of the Germanic tribes where the Aesir were venerated and Germanic languages were spoken. And yes, the Scandinavian languages were Germanic languages. They all had very similar words. They all venerated the Aesir. They all had pretty much the same holy days. Now, when we discuss the goddess Oster, we need to look at three forms of evidence. And the first evidence we're going to look at is archaeological evidence. We're also going to look at linguistic evidence, and we're also going to look at the literary evidence. So my map to the left is the area of southern England and Northumbria where Ostria Hene stones were found, and the area in Frisia and Francia where Ostria Hene stones were found. Now, what's an Ostria Hene stone? Well, the Roman army brought with it their matrone cult, and they left behind stones venerating a goddess in the matrone cult called Ostar, which in Latin is AUS as opposed to our standard OST in the Germanic languages, or in the Anglo-Frisian, the EOST. But you can see that this area of northern Francia, Frisia, and England, and we're going to show that the archaeological, the literary, and the linguistic evidence all tie, proving that this was the area where the goddess Oster was venerated. And notice that the Old Saxon area of Old Saxony is not there. Notice that the Scandinavian, their lands are not there. Denmark, Norway, Sweden is not pictured. So these are the only places where the Austrian stones have been found. And soon I'm going to show that not only does the archaeological evidence prove this because they're found nowhere else, but the linguistic and the literary evidence back this up as well. Now I have pictures here of two books. The first book is The Cult of the Matrone in the Roman Rhineland, a historical evaluation of the archaeological evidence by Dr. Alex G. Garman. And the picture on the far right is the book Pagan Goddesses in the Early Germanic World, Oster, Retta, and the Cult of Matrons by Dr. Philip A. Shaw. When you discuss the Old English calendar, their Mother's Night, and their Oster, it comes directly from the Matrone cult. So these two books are the authority on the subject. Both of these are English professors, collegiate professors on the subject. And I really think both books are essential, though the one on the left by Alex Garman is around $500 on Amazon now because the few people that own a copy are hoarding it and basically demanding ransom for it, whereas the book on the right you can get brand new for around $30. And I would say that's the more important of the two. But looking at some of the literary evidence, these two books do discuss the archaeological evidence, and I've covered it in my map. But, Procopius, who wrote in 551 AD, basically stated that the island of Britain is inhabited by three populous nations, each ruled by a king. And the names of these nations are the Anglo-Frisians and the island Britons. So the earliest references that we have of people living in Britain and this time period state that they were Angles and Frisians and Britons living there. And that's what the archaeological evidence and the linguistic evidence as well shows, because Old English was spoken in Frisia, and that's right next door to Francia, where the matrone stones are found in Frisia and Francia and in Old English lands. So here again, I have two maps. You can see here's the Roman Rhineland in Francia, basically Belgium. Belgium basically went into the Franks lived in this area historically, and the Franks were a Germanic tribe. and they converted to Christianity in the year 497 AD. And the Franks and the English, are the two literary mentions of Oster, but that is where the Franks lived. And hence, when we say Francia, we do mean northern France, but technically, historically, it wasn't France. But basically speaking, the Roman Empire did not include Old Saxony, which would be here, and Scandinavia, which would be Denmark, Sweden, and Norway above. The Germanic tribes under the leadership of Arminius, of the tribe of the Cherusker, who would become one of the Saxon tribes, they defeated the Romans in 9 AD at the Battle of the Teutoburg Forest. They took 3 Roman eagles and annihilated 3 Roman legions, which was around 22,000 troops. And therefore, the Romans never went into Germania after that. They looked at it as a bunch of swamps and forests, and they didn't like those areas, whereas Celtic Gaul, which is really most of modern France today, was, Celtic, and they had roads, and from the Roman point of view, that was far more civilized. The Germanic tribes are mainly subsistence farmers, and they felt they couldn't really economically contribute to the empire, or the Roman Reich, the Roman Empire. A Kaiser is a Caesar, so to speak. But nonetheless, you can see the Matrone stones in the Roman Rhineland, in Frisia, and in Kent here, Wessex there, and there are a few scattered in Northumbria. So this is the archaeological evidence. Now let's look at the literary evidence. We have 2 calendars to survive. We technically have 3 calendars because the Scandinavian calendars did survive. Technically 4. You can say the Old Saxon calendar survived 2. It's mentioned in the Essen Necrology, an Old Saxon list of people who died in early churches right after the conversion period by moon names, and the Old Saxon calendar does not have Oster listed. The Scandinavian calendars do not have Oster listed either. If you were to read the Eddas and the Sagas and all the Scandinavian poems, you're not going to find one reference to a goddess named Oster anywhere, because it was, again, confined to where the archaeological, linguistic, and literary evidence has it, which is pretty overwhelming evidence in northern France, Frisia, and England. But let's get to the 2 literary. Here's the later one, around 830 AD. Einhard, a member of the Frankish court, wrote the Frankish heathen calendar. This, of course, is 3.5 centuries after they were converted, but nonetheless, he mentions 2 moons. One of them is called Lent, and the other is Oster. Now, Lent is a moon where the days are decidedly getting longer around March. Oster, well, according to Asatru and Wicca, is in March, but Oster is a moon that more likely corresponds to April. And Oster was really in a full moon in mid to late April, sometimes as late as early May. But we do have this reference to Oster moon, and only the moon. It's not even mentioned as a goddess in this passage. So this is in Einhard's Vita, Karoli, Magni, chapter 29. The earliest and the only other literary mention in literary sources, which is parchment sources or book sources, is the Old English calendar written in De Temporum Ratione. Bede wrote it in the exact year 725 AD. He lists the moon names of the year, and he basically calls April Oster moon. A monoth, a moon, becomes a month because it's a cycle of the moon is a month. So the word moon and month are related in the Germanic languages only. And he lists them, the moon names. But at a later point in this passage, he claims that Oster moon, which is interpreted as Passover moon, because the word Pascha means Passover. That is the Greek and Latin word for Passover. And in English and German countries, they did call Easter Passover until around the 1600s, which is 900 years after Bede. But nonetheless, Bede basically states that Oster moon is now interpreted as Passover moon. It had its name from their goddess Oster, whom they held feasts in this moon. So Bede is very clear that Oster is a goddess, and this is our only literary source that she's a goddess. And of course, she's on 150 plus Ostra stones, so we have the archaeological evidence as well. But I wanted to quote this one part from Bede, where Bede says, "Thus, the moon by which they began their winter season was called winter fillet, a name compounded of the terms winter and full moon, because on the full moon of that moon, winter was thought to begin." So basically what I'm saying is while Bede doesn't come out and say that 6 moons after the full moon that is winter full moon that starts winter would be Oster full moon, which would start their summer. He doesn't come out and say it. He's too busy being the Christian that he is and saying, hey, these heathens had some divine foreknowledge of the Passover moon. So Bede pretty much shows in his writing that at this time Easter was not equated with the Christian celebration. It would still be known as Passover for almost 1,000 years after Bede's death. But that's the historical literary evidence of Oster. Now, if we were to look at linguistic evidence, I'm also going to list runic evidence. I should really add runes as a fourth evidence of where the people went into England from and the goddesses that they worship, the matrone cult. So linguists classify Old English today as an Anglo-Frisian language, and you can clearly see Wikipedia has an article on it. We also have an Anglo-Frisian Futhark. In Old Saxon lands, which is northern Germany, we have only Elder Futhark finds, and possibly the oldest runic find ever is the Meldorf brooch. That is found in Old Saxony, and that is Elder Futhark. The Anglo-Frisian Futhark, or the Old English Futhark, is not found in Old Saxony or in Scandinavia. That Futhark is only found in the same areas where the Ostra stones are. And the literary evidence ties the Frankish calendar in northern France and the Frisians and Bede's calendar. Bede was educated by Kent bishops. In Bede's ecclesiastical history, he has a preface where he lists a dozen bishops' names, and they're all from either Kent or Canterbury, and Canterbury is in Kent. If you're English, you'll understand probably why I'm laughing. I am not English. I'm American. Both sides of my family live in Germany, but I was born and raised here. But, the runes and the linguists classify English. So if I were to continue my argument for the Saxons in Saxony and the Scandinavians not knowing Oster, I mean, there's no Austria stones there. 2, the runes in Saxony and in Scandinavia around this period were Elder Futhark, not Futhark. I would also state, as I covered before, the Oxford linguist Philip A. Shaw in his book, Pagan Goddesses in the Other Germanic World, Oster, Reda, and the Cult of Matrons, that Oster is a regional deity of the English and Kent. And I would also say, as an Old Saxon heathen myself and lay scholar, the Old Saxon epic poem called the Hellion Gospel, or just the Hellion, the word Easter is Pascha, and there is even a title of one of the chapters in the Hellion that's called Pascha. And the other chapters in the Hellion are fits or fitten. You can say these are songs, not really chapters, but whatever. But the only title is Pascha. And that's saying a lot, because if the Saxons knew Oster and Bede is clearly linking Oster with Pascha, and all the missionaries in Saxony were from England, the literary sources are extremely clear. Charlemagne called to England and the churches there for missionaries to come preach to the Saxons. That evidence is overwhelming. Those that knew of Bede did not say Oster here. They said Pascha. And, to title the most important in a heathenized gospel, Pascha is strong evidence to me that, not only do we not have the linguistic evidence, because Old Saxon and Old English are 2 distinct languages, and you need training in both to read both. And Old Saxon is more like the Danes language. They're neighbors to the Danes. They live a ways away from England, and other nations are between Old Saxony and England. Lots of people get pissed off saying, oh, come on, man, Old Saxon is Old English. They obviously haven't tried reading the Old English Beowulf and then try reading the Hellion and seeing how different these are. Linguists classify them as 2 different sub-branches of the West Germanic branch. Anglo-Frisian is its own branch, Old Saxon is its own sub-branch. So that's the way it is. And here, basically, I'm not going to read this whole slide. I mean, I basically state that around 1600 in English and German countries, they started calling Easter or Easter with the title Easter. It's always called Passover. Even around the rest of the world today, Easter is called Pascha or some variant. Though I have read somewhere that the Greeks prefer Lammas or Lambas. I think that's a lamb. So I'm not Greek, so I'm not any scholar of Greek practices or language, but that's what I have read. And the sources that I've read it from, I believe these are historical sources. But nonetheless, I do think we need to ditch the idea that Ostar is a fertility goddess. Garden Stone, in his book on Ostar, and Philip Shaw both state that we have no fertility mentions in the literary evidence. The stones themselves do not imply evidence of fertility. The word Ostar obviously means east. EOST is your old English word for east. OST is your, Frisian and Old Saxon words for east. And I even believe that is the Scandinavian word for east. So no ifs, ands, or buts. The sun does rise in the east, but that doesn't even mean that Ostar is a dawn goddess. It's kind of like saying that Austria is a nation, Osterreich, instead of it meaning Eastern Empire, Eastern Reich. It's named after the holy day Easter, which is clearly not the case, by the way. But no ifs, ands, or buts, Ostar does mean east, but that doesn't necessarily mean dawn. And I often like to point out, there are so many posts in Asatru circles around the solstice and Christmas time, and the equinox of 321 to 323-ish. It almost is like Christmas and Easter is being continued in Asatru, that those are the only holidays that many in Asatru get excited about, because that's all that seemed to be discussed on social media. Sigrblot, the actual holy day that the Saxons and the Scandinavians kept, and the day that's actually in the sagas themselves, is not typically mentioned by Asatru, so it's one of these things I bang my head on. And Asatru and Wicca keep Easter, or their Ostara, which is a misspelling of Oster historically, by the way, that comes from the writings of Jacob Grimm, who was guessing. He seemed to have forgotten that we did have the High German word Oster in the Frankish writings in the Franks, like in Frankfurt area, for example. Central Germany, they spoke Old High German language is in that area, so he didn't have to try to guess what the High German word was. It was already recorded. And nonetheless, but Asatru and Wicca keep an equinox, Easter, or Ostara. But the church is actually more heathen because, as I mentioned, that it's on a full moon in late April or early May. The church actually uses the full moon to determine when Easter was, and Asatru has completely decided to ignore the moon. Their holidays are 100% solar, 8 solar points on the Wiccan wheel of the year. So, the church today decided in the early 400s that Easter would be on the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox, which is similar but not exactly to how the Frisians, the Anglo-Frisians, dated their Oster. But nonetheless, that is when Saxon heathens and Scandinavian heathens, 3 full moons after Yule full moon, would be keeping their Sigrblot or summer bloat. So if there is no Saxon or Scandinavian Easter, what do we do? Well, the answer is Sigrblot. Sigrblot is the historical Scandinavian and Old Saxon holy day. We have it attested twice. And I have to state that victory bloat is what the word Sigrblot means victory bloat, and I'll get to why I keep saying that. But in Heimskringla Olaf Saga Helga, chapter 77, in Svithjod, it was the old Sidu, the old custom, as long as heathenism prevailed, that the chief bloat took place in Goa, which is a moon. The word moon is actually not in the text. I put it there so that we understand it. But it took place at Goa moon at Uppsala. Bloats were to be made at that time for peace and victory. So we have Sigblots going on for the king and for the people all over Sweden. They were to resort there. So Sigrblot is not discussed today in modern Asatru circles. I don't think I ever see any happy Sigrblot post outside of from the Aldsidu folk. The old custom, notice that the first sentence with Vita was the old custom, the Aldsidu. That was the old custom. Ynglinga Saga chapter 8 lists the 3 great bloats of the year. It says Odin established the same law in his land that had been in force in Asaland. On winter day, which is the first day of winter, there should be a bloat for a good year. And in the middle of winter is a bloat for a good crop. Yes, that's what Yule is, people, a bloat for a good crop. And the third bloat will be on summer day, which is the first day of summer, a victory bloat. Now again, I have to stress that Sigrblot is the word that means victory bloat. And I keep saying this because in May of 2017, I was a member, not a full-fledged member of the Asatru community, TAC, but I was on their Facebook group and someone was making a post about Imbolc, and I basically came out and said, hey, listen, Limbolc and Beltane, what you're talking about are actually Celtic holy days. These are not Scandinavian holy days. And by the way, Ostara is actually Sigrblot in the Scandinavian sources. And I said, go look up Ynglinga Saga chapter 8. So what happened is this female who posted this got pissed off, and one of the admins in the Asatru community looked up Ynglinga Saga chapter 8, and they saw that it said victory bloat, and they said that I made up Sigrblot. They accused me of inventing Sigrblot, like I pulled it out of my ass or something, and tossed me. And that was one of the reasons why I left Asatru, because I kept trying to teach them historical and make posts on historical heathenry, and I felt 99% of Asatru couldn't give a flying fuck about historical accuracy, yet they claim they did the old ways. So, it was one of the reasons why I founded Aldsidu and divorced Asatru, which was a great move on my part, by the way. But that is why I keep repeating victory bloat. And by the way, that same day in May 2017, that's when The Last Kingdom Season 2 came out on Netflix. And I binge watched it that day because I really enjoy that television show. And in episode 3 of season 2, when young Ragnar and Hild went looking for Uhtred and they found a slave trader, they were asking him if he knew of an Uhtred who was sold. And he said, yes. He says they'll be back after Sigrblot. So Netflix apparently knows more about Sigrblot than the Asatru community. Let me go back to these 2 books that prove the Matrone cult was in the Rhineland, and Ostar is a part of the Matrone cult. And yes, the Romans did conquer Britannia, the Romano-Britons. Rome held on to Britain for almost 400 years, and they definitely made an impression. So when Frisian settlers came and intermingled with the British crowd, they adopted some German elements of the calendar, but Mother's Night and Oster certainly remained. So if you're interested in historical Saxon heathenry, come visit us on the Facebook page Saxon Heathenry. Please join. And hey, also, a lot of people accuse me of being an Anglophobe. I have huge respect for Old English heathenry. It is an amazing heathenry, and they have some cool things that we Saxons don't have, and vice versa. So no, I'm not an Anglophobe. I'm just one that studies the actual history of it, and I want to get historical heathenry right. So just because I don't follow the modern popular view but follow the scholars, it's only because I'm trying to go for accuracy. I don't care if people want to give me thumbs down. It is my job to teach historical info, and if you guys don't like the historical info, I guess you can give me the thumbs down. But I would say maybe you should give the historical thumbs down. Come visit us on the webpage, aldsidu.com. I do have a blog, so /blog. I think that's a /. And please like and subscribe. Thank you so much for listening to the video. And hey, thank you for watching.